Although I love modern guitars, when I first saw the Strandberg and the EndurNeck in particular, I was hesitant to try it. I thought to myself, I'm not a modern shredder and it probably isn't designed for me anyway, especially since I've already been playing guitar for 19 years. Normal guitars. Well, then I briefly tried it, I was intrigued, and I decided to document 100 hours of Strandberg exclusivity. And 52 days later, we are here at the conclusion of the first season of The Experiment, the series where I explore a single gear category in extreme detail over an extended period of time. In this video, I'll be presenting every single detail and lesson I learned about Strandberg guitars and their competitors, and at the end, I'll answer all of your questions. But before we begin, there are a few important things I need to mention from the start. This video is long, but you have the blessing of chapter times. Use them. I consider this review a review of Strandberg as a brand and concept as a whole. So yes, the majority of my time was spent playing this used 2019 Bowden Fusion neck through, but I also tried a new NX model, the True Temperament model. I owned a different new old Strandberg in the past, and I went to Guitar Center and tried out a bunch of other Strandbergs as well. So this is not just about this guitar, it's about Strandberg as a whole. Although I will mention tone and pickups, this is not a tone demo, but I did do a tone demo that you can watch right here. The fact that I did this entire series without sponsors or payment should already tell you that I do like Strandberg as a company. That being said, this instrument is far from perfect, and I believe some of the critiques I present in the video can elevate the brand even higher. With that in mind, I also know that I have the gift and curse of being annoyingly observant and picky. So throughout this review, we will be using my patented big of a deal meter, so you always have an accurate representation of how big of a deal any critique is. The top of the meter represents a must-mod situation, while the bottom is no biggie. And finally, if you've watched the other episodes of this series, you will hear many recurring themes as I start from the top and work my way to the bottom of the instrument. But I do promise there are still plenty of things I have yet to discuss, which includes this little nub at the end of the guitar. Every headless guitar has this region above the nut that includes some type of string lock system. And you'll notice that some guitars have a small wooden nub here, while others do not. The inclusion of this little nut is the first design element that I really like about Strandberg, and that's because it gives me the perfect amount of space to secure my preferred D'Addario micro headstock tuner. I know Philip Knight prefers the Snark tuner, which is also a fine tool, but when I was in music school, the instructors would always instruct us to remove them from our instruments before we took the stage, which kind of ruins their utility in my opinion. As a result, I took to using the D'Addario tuner and turning it backward so that it is basically invisible to the audience and the viewer, yet still useful for me because I can still see it here in tune. I'll link the tuner below. It's very affordable, and essentially whenever a guitar joins my stable, I Amazon Prime another one of these tuners and it lives on that particular guitar, on that headstock at all times. And this isn't possible on other headless designs like that of Kiesel, for example. Now, as we move down, we get to the first gripe that I've mentioned from day one with the Strandberg, and that's this string lock system. And my gripes are as follows. Number one, both the older version on this guitar and the newer version found on the NX model, both of those locking systems leave an undesirable amount of excess string hanging from the top of the guitar. Now, some commenters have noted that that shouldn't even be an issue because whenever we play guitar normally, we don't ever put our hand back here anyway. But those of you who play headless guitars understand that for some strange reason, we often find our hands in this area, and that means we get poked by these string ends. And if you still think this is a stupid complaint, keep in mind that Strandberg did attempt to redesign this aspect of the guitar, which means they were clearly getting some level of negative feedback about it from players. And I'll say it again, even the redesign on the NX model doesn't fix the issue. Number two, the corner of the string lock system is a very sharp right angle, and I found myself smashing into it on several occasions when playing in first position. But here's the thing. I find that every relationship with a guitar is very similar to the relationship with a new sexual partner. We want to pretend that looks don't matter, but looks are often what initially attracts us. Early on, we can overlook certain annoyances like bad tuning stability, but over time, they really put a strain on the relationship. And other things that started as annoyances, like an overly thick neck or sharp tone, can grow on us over time and eventually become something we prefer in a partner. With that in mind, the Strandberg string lock has become something that is less annoying to me over time. I naturally started avoiding certain hand positions that caused issues early on, and although I still get poked on occasion, it isn't a deal breaker. That being said, I still do consider the string lock, the NX model and the old school model, an objective design flaw that should be corrected over time. And the fact that both of the very inexpensive guitars I tested had a better design shows me that a solution is possible and it doesn't have to be expensive. Right after we leave the string lock, we move to one of Strandberg's greatest strengths, the combination of a 0 fret and a Teflon nut. Now, Strandberg isn't the first or only company to use this system, but as a whole, this is rare among mass-produced brands, so I'm happy to see it on Strandberg's. So what's the point of this combination of a Teflon nut and a 0 fret? Well, the nut on a standard guitar without a 0 fret has two functions. Number one, it keeps the strings perfectly spaced, and number two, it sets the action or the string height at the first fret. The second function of setting the string height requires a nut to be precisely cut. If it's cut too low, the string will buzz, and if it's cut too high, you'll never achieve low action. The combination of a 0 fret and a nut separates these two functions. The string passes through the nut, which establishes the string spacing, and then sits on top of the 0 fret, which gives you the proper string height. And although a 0 fret isn't required to achieve low action, it does make the process easier and likely more consistent from a manufacturing standpoint. Moreover, you know for a fact that the action can't be any lower since the string is literally laying on top of the first fret. The one drawback is that depending on the string gauges you use, you may occasionally get a little plinking sound when you bend strings. You probably won't even be able to hear this. Really, you're never going to notice this. If you're actually playing music, it makes no difference and you never hear it through the amplifier, so whatever. But this plinking sound is not a big deal, nor is it a Strandberg only issue. I got the same plink on my VGA guitars if I wasn't using the exact perfect nut for the string gauge. So yes, I'm able to achieve consistently low action on a Strandberg, but that isn't just because of the 0 fret and the Teflon nut. The instrument also has stainless steel frets with great leveling and a very flat 20-inch radius. In fact, the 20-inch radius on the Strandberg might be my favorite feature of the neck as a whole. And I'm not exactly sure why more guitars don't have flatter radii. I know it's found on one of the PRS signature models, but it's hard to find on modern guitars. The standard explanation for why we have a round radius is because our fingers have a natural curve, and as a result, a rounder radius makes playing chords easier. And although that does make logical sense, I just don't feel that play out when I play a rounded radius guitar as compared to a 20-inch radius like this one. Ultimately, it's all really a matter of personal preference, but consider this. Flat fretboard radiuses are very common on nylon string guitars, and nylon string guitarists play a ton of difficult chords that need to be fingered with high precision, especially since it's an acoustic instrument. And since the nylon string guitar predates the electric guitar, I'm convinced that there is no objective chording benefit to using a rounder radius. I personally rely on a guitar style that has a wide variety of chords and legato playing, and I've found that this Strandberg is one of the easiest guitars I've ever had for playing chords in particular. And as you watch this review, if you like any of the chords or rhythm playing that you see throughout this video, you'll want to check out my rhythm courses linked below. Now, although I really enjoyed the fretboard radius and the stainless steel frets and the leveling, there are a few things I don't love about this neck. Number one, this 2019 Bowden Fusion has very sharp fret ends. I mentioned this throughout the series, and in episode 1 I said that it isn't a big deal, but over the last 100 hours, the roughness of these fret ends has become really annoying, especially when I'm playing with my thumb over the neck or doing any technique that requires a greater grip on the neck like bending or vibrato. Now, this guitar is used, and I know that you never know why a used guitar may have issues, But I also bought a new refurb directly from Strandberg, and that guitar also had a few sharp edges. Now, the new guitar had far less sharp edges than this guitar, but they were still noticeable. And I've also gotten a few comments from viewers of the channel mentioning that their Strandberg guitars also have a few sharp fret ends. This is a huge issue. I've reviewed several guitars on this channel, some as expensive as the Strandberg, but most were far less expensive, and the fret ends on this particular Strandberg is not on par with the guitars that I've reviewed that were even under $1,000, and they're definitely not on par with the guitars of a similar price point that I have tried. That being said, I recently went to one of my local guitar centers and they have a new multi-wall display with Strandberg guitars. I picked up every single one of those guitars and not one had a sharp fret end, at least at that moment. Now, since I go to this guitar center at least once a month, I know that this wall display is no more than 3 to 6 weeks old, and it's possible that these guitars are brand new from the factory. That either means that this issue has been corrected by Strandberg already, or it means that these guitars are so new they have not had a chance to sprout yet. Either way, I hope that Strandberg either is aware of this issue or has already fixed this issue on their newer models. So let everyone know in the comments below if you've personally encountered this issue. And before I move on from this topic, let me address this issue now, because in every video there's someone who mentions the fact that literally any guitar can suffer from fret sprout. And that is true to some degree. But let me say this, when I pay over $2,000 for a modern instrument with stainless steel frets, my assumption is that I won't have any fret issues anytime soon, especially not in the first 4 years of the guitar's life, and most certainly not right from the company like the other Strandberg that I had. This isn't normal for the price range. I've reviewed many guitars with stainless steel frets that are much older, that have been through all types of situations, and none have had these type of fret ends. And for those of you who will say I'm nitpicking, you have to remember that this guitar sold for nearly $3,000 when it was new in 2019, which has the same buying power as $3,544 in 2023. When we spend this much money on a guitar, we are well beyond good pickups, playability, and reliability. That stuff should just be a given when a guitar is around $1,000. The last thing I'll mention about the frets, and this part is 100% personal preference, is that I don't like the fan. On the 8 string or even on a 7 string model, a fan makes a lot of sense in my opinion, but a mandatory fan fret on a 6 string guitar for me is frustrating. For me, the downside is that once I get above the 7th fret or so, certain chords and chordal phrases become far more difficult, and above the 12th fret, certain things are just impossible for me personally. So I want to be very, very clear about what I mean when I say that certain things are difficult for me to play with the EndurNeck. And keep in mind, this is just my hands and they're kind of big and my playing technique and all of that stuff. So first things first, all of your normal chords that everyone always plays, all of that is totally fine. All of your stuff like, you know, all your major normal chords, and then all of your triads, you know, stuff like this. All of that stuff is totally fine. Your normal bar chords, all of that's totally fine. There are a few chords that I like to use, however, that can be a bit difficult, and they're not difficult everywhere, it's just certain places. So for example, you may have heard me do this little lick. I'll do it first in the key of G. So you know your normal G chord like this on the 3rd fret, right? I like to do this little trick where I go to the 3rd, in this case that's a B, and I like to do this little lick. And then I continue going down to the G chord. And what I notice is that that first part of it is really hard to do in the key of A or in the key of B flat in particular. So let's do it again in the key of B flat, then it will be like this. Because of the fan, I really have to... It's hard for me to do in this key. Of course, B flat and A are very common keys in jazz and in also regular music for guitar playing. So that for me is a bit it's not great. And then there's also a lot of these type of major chords. They're little variations of major chords that I like to play like this. Or even like this. And whenever a chord has the fingers all working independently, for example, something like this, or even something like this, all of those chords are going to work fine no matter where you play them. But when I have to use a bar and then some additional fingers, I find it hard to do with this particular fan. And that starts for me at around the 12th fret. So for example, this chord right here, I can't really play it at the 12th fret. This is what it's supposed to sound like, right? Or like this. But as I move up here, I lose my ability to play it. So yeah, I understand that a lot of people don't even care about stuff like this, but those fun, unique things that I think are important for my style, I find it really hard to do with the EndurNeck. I'll say it again, all of your normal chords, even all of your normal jazz chords, so all of your stuff like this, all of that stuff works totally fine. It's just a few of my things that I can't do. By contrast, however, Matthew Dale, who has been on the channel, doesn't notice the fan fret at all and would actually prefer a rounder radius, even though I prefer the flat radius. So I understand that it would be impossible to manufacture enough options to please every single guitarist. I personally find the fan fret a disturbance. I have to work around it, but again, that is personal preference. Speaking of features that enhance playability, I am still absolutely in love with the neck through design on this instrument. I personally prefer a neck through or a set neck for basically every type of guitar, as long as the builder does a good job of sculpting the heel joint. And as you can see, the sculpting on this heel joint is fantastic. It is now one of my favorite heel joints of all time, along with the Parker Fly guitar. As of making this video, this particular model is no longer available, and Strandberg has far fewer neck through options. That being said, the updated NX heel joint allows for practically the same level of high fret access as the neck through for a far lower price. And if you don't care about the aesthetics of a neck through, or if you prefer the tone of a bolt-on guitar, I think you'll be happy with the new NX sculpting. If you're choosing between the new NX model and the older Strandberg bolt-on models, the high fret access on the older models is honestly also very, very good, but the NX model is definitely far more comfortable. In addition to the great high fret access, this neck also has 2 carbon fiber reinforcements that you can actually see in the neck itself. So let's talk about neck stability. Sometime in the 2010s, just about every company started offering roasted neck options or some type of graphite or carbon fiber reinforcements and marketing their necks as supremely stable. To my knowledge, VGA and Parker are 2 of the companies that pioneered this technology, and that was sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. And as you may or may not know, I've played and owned VGAs and Parkers from the 90s, and I can say with confidence that whatever method they used back then holds up even now, 30 years later. Those necks are still unworldly stable. Since that time, I've also tried several companies with roasted maple necks and or reinforcements, and they were just not as stable as the Parkers or the VGAs. And FYI, this is well before the YouTube channel started, so those reviews aren't actually on the channel. But I could think of at least 2 companies that market a reinforced neck, and the necks aren't that stable. Now, I bring this up because I want you to understand that you can't just throw in reinforcements into a neck and then just assume that that automatically makes it perfectly stable. That is not the case. So the question is, how stable is the Strandberg neck? I would say the Strandberg neck is among the best I've ever tried in terms of stability, up there with VGA and up there with Parker. Let me explain how I came to this conclusion. So I actually planned this entire video series 6 months ago, back in August 2022. So I've been getting a lot of comments on my YouTube channel telling me I should just try Strandberg, so I finally did. If I'm falling in love with this guitar like I feel like I am after only a couple of hours of playing it, what would that mean for the rest of my guitars and my life as it has to do with guitar? Am I going to have to sell all of my electrics and replace them all with Strandbergs, with custom pickups and God knows what else? Am I going to have to buy a custom acoustic guitar with a EndurNeck? And when I started to have these thoughts, I realized that, if I'm going to give this a real chance, if I'm going to give this guitar an honest chance and give it a real review, there's no way I can do it in one 20-30-minute video. It would have to be an entire series. I then did the research of a model I like and bought this 2019 Bowden Fusion neck through on Reverb used in September. Don't forget, we're still talking about neck stability, but stick with me here. When this guitar arrived in September, I took it out of the box and it was completely in tune, even though it came a few states away. I then took the strings off, put my strings on, set it up and all of that stuff, and I put it in my storage area in this basement on September 10th, 2022. It was 84 degrees that day. When I took the guitar out of the case and out of storage on December 18th, it was 35 degrees. This guitar was still almost perfectly in tune, and it was obviously still perfectly set up. No adjustments needed to be done. When I play guitar every day, I almost always have the whammy bar in my hand, and I use it for several hours every single day. And I can count on one hand the amount of times I had to retune this guitar in 100 hours of play. The tuning stability is just phenomenal. And just to be extra obnoxious, I planned a short January excursion from Jersey City, New Jersey to Brooklyn, New York with Mystery Girl. I walked about 10 miles that day with this on my back on several trains, and when I returned home, this guitar was still in tune. This guitar simply has amazing tuning stability. Let's be honest, you've never seen a guitar review like this one, so give this video a like to help support the channel. Also, I will be reviewing subscriber guitars, so send an email to andrefletamusic@gmail.com if you have a unique instrument you'd like to see on the channel. And finally, we need to talk about the EndurNeck, but before we do, you should remember a few things. There is no one guitar neck that is going to be perfect for everyone's hands, posture, playing, and so on. Regular viewers of the channel will know that I prefer a big fat neck, and if I play a thin neck for too long, it actually gives my wrist and hand pain. And of course, we know plenty of other guitar players, some of whom have big hands like me, who prefer a flat, thin neck. So I can't tell you the EndurNeck is good or bad for you, but I can tell you my observations. Now, while I explain the neck, I'm going to have a visual representation of the angles on the neck so that you have a clear idea of the regions I'm talking about. But keep in mind, the model on screen is obviously stationary, but the neck shape does change as you move up and down the neck. The first thing you should know is that the EndurNeck is thicker than the typical modern C shape we find on most modern guitars today. But because of the EndurNeck's design, it actually doesn't feel very thick. So if you like thin necks, I don't think this will feel thick to you. But if you like thick necks, this does feel comfortably thick. It's this interesting thing that they figured out with this shape. I also adjusted to this neck practically instantly. It never felt weird, nor did it ever confuse my technique. And today I can switch from the EndurNeck to a regular neck back and forth without any disturbance whatsoever. Now, some people worry that the neck is only good if you are a technical modern shredder with perfect technique. But I honestly found that playing dad blues bends, vibrato, and thumb over rhythm guitar is actually even more comfortable on this guitar than other guitars. And I think that's because the flattish regions on the top and the bottom of the neck help you grip. And even though I have biggish hands, I've never found thumb over chords comfortable on any other guitar neck until I got this one. So this is my most comfortable neck when it comes to thumb over playing, bending, vibrato, all of that stuff. And I'll also say that my muting is also a lot better on this guitar neck. There are are also occasions when playing standard guitar chords where parts of your hand and your palm come in contact with the top and the bottom flat regions. This doesn't make anything easier, but it does feel nice. It's a sensation you can't get on any other neck, and it's kind of enjoyable. Before buying this guitar, I had already spent many years refining my left hand technique, especially for legato accuracy and lead guitar playing. And I have courses on that coming soon, so you'll want to subscribe to the Guitarcraft newsletter below to get notified about when they're ready. Now, because of all this effort I put into my left hand technique, the EndurNeck definitely didn't make me any better. It also didn't make my playing any worse, so we can say it was somewhat neutral. However, I can say that the EndurNeck did lead to a fairly important technical realization for me, but this is going to take a little bit of backstory, so bear with me here. When I was intensively refining my left hand technique, my primary focus was rotating my hand from a diagonal position to a more straight position. And I was doing this after around 15 years of playing, so it took a bit of relearning on my part. Around the same time, I also had a wrist injury unrelated to the guitar, and after a year of iontophoresis and physical therapy, I got all of my technique back, but also realized that I couldn't keep my hand in this straight position for too long before it caused pain. I've been working around this for years now by changing my hand position and taking breaks when I'm doing longer practice sessions. While playing the EndurNeck, I noticed that when I got to around the 8 to 12 fret area, the shape of the neck actually encouraged me to play slightly more diagonal than straight on. And at first, I fought this instinct just like I would with any normal neck, but I decided to let the neck decide for me since this is a test after all. And what I found is that this slightly more diagonal position at the higher frets for me actually allowed me to play far longer without pain. During practice sessions in the past, I couldn't really play legato in this area in this way for longer than about 20 minutes without needing a break. And this past Sunday, I played legato in this area for literally 3 hours straight before noticing any fatigue whatsoever. When I pick up a regular guitar, I can use that knowledge and rotate my hand ever so slightly to make it more comfortable. But the EndurNeck does take some of that mental work away, making it easier to do. And on top of that, I learned about that little technique switch from the EndurNeck. And for me, this lesson alone was worth the price of this guitar. Now, switching back and forth between the Strandberg and my current favorite guitar, the D'Angelico, I did notice that my hand gets tired far quicker when I'm playing the D'Angelico guitar. At the same time, however, when I first switched from the D'Angelico guitar to the Strandberg, my hand got more tired faster playing the Strandberg. So this may just be a matter of being more comfortable with the guitar I've been playing the most recently. But as I conclude the section, I want to make a few things very clear. I'm not saying the EndurNeck is going to magically lead to any special realization for you like it did for me. And to be completely honest, guitar necks are so complicated that it's hard for me to say what the most important factor is. I mentioned that I love a 20-inch radius, but I also love these type of frets, and I love the nut width. So which of these features is actually what's making me enjoy the neck the most? If we took the same nut width, the same frets, and the same radius, but put it on a rounded, fat neck guitar, would I like that even more? I can't answer that question, but it is something to consider when deciding necks and when deciding guitars. The overall feel is a combination of the specs. It's never one spec in isolation. So in summary, yes, I really do like the EndurNeck. Yes, it did lead to a great realization for my own guitar playing, but the EndurNeck is not a feature that I now think I need for every other guitar. But one feature I would like on every single guitar is some type of ergonomic body design like that of the Strandberg. If you're going to take any simple Strat-shaped guitar and make it headless, that guitar will be great for travel and it'll be more lightweight overall, but chopping off the head and reducing the weight doesn't automatically transform it to being an ergonomic guitar. I talked about this in great detail in episode 2, but in my opinion, the biggest key to an ergonomic guitar is its comfort in this 45-degree neck position, and this is where the Strandberg body shines the most in my opinion. Yes, the forearm bevel is comfortable without being too extreme. The belly cut is also very nice, but this leg rest contour and the lightweight chambering of the body makes for the most versatilely comfortable guitar I've ever played or ever owned. I do think that this contour can be refined ever so slightly, but I'm not exactly sure of how just yet, And even then, that might contribute to maybe 3% more comfort. And it's certainly never going to be something I complain about in terms of this guitar. It's very, very comfortable as is. The guitar always balances perfectly well with or without a strap. And since the body is so small, I can play the guitar in any situation comfortably. And we're going to talk a lot more about the overall comfort of this guitar and why that matters in the conclusion. But this body is fantastic. There are no complaints from me whatsoever. And when it comes to selecting guitars, I'm someone who personally looks for comfort even more so than I look for tone. But speaking of tone, let's briefly discuss Strandberg's tone and pickups. I've tried several Strandberg guitars now, and I've looked through the specs of every single model that they've ever offered. And credit to Strandberg as a company, they've never released an instrument with bad pickups. All of the ones I tried sounded amazing here and in guitar stores. And looking at the specs from all of the other instruments, I can't imagine that any of the other instruments could sound bad. I also really like the fact that they try different things with their wiring. For example, they wired some of their humbucker models with a 5-way switch, which gives you more tonal options. And this model has a different feature in position 3. Instead of having this middle pickup by itself in this position, you have the front coil of the neck pickup and the rear coil of the bridge pickup, and that gives a very nice, funky, telly type tone, and that's probably my second favorite tone in this entire guitar, apart from just the humbucker on full by itself. Now, I know there are a few die-hard middle single coil pickup position fans. You could of course just change the wiring to get that pickup to play. But Strandberg's choice here, to me, speaks volumes. They could have just got expensive Sir pickups or expensive Fishman pickups like they have, threw them in a guitar with the standard wiring, and the guitar community would have been happy. We would have been very excited that they offered these high quality pickups. They didn't need to do anything else, and yet they did. They went the extra mile of trying to figure out a wiring that's going to be best for the player. In my opinion, the way that a company handles the small details like wiring tells me a lot about them. But speaking of small details, I want to talk about the volume and tone knob placement on this guitar. But first, this guitar is of course my number one guitar, my Parker Knifefly that is customized with my own wiring solution. As you can see near the bridge pickup, there is no volume knob, and instead I have a stacked volume tone knob right here. So I have the volume on the bottom taper, and I have the tone on the top taper, and as a result, when I'm playing this guitar, I'm never smashing into the volume or the tone knob, and I can still keep both of them. In short, I don't ever like the placement of a standard volume knob on a Strat style guitar because I bump into it when I'm playing. But somehow, even though this volume knob is in what looks to be the same position as a standard Strat, I never bump into this volume knob. If you compare Strandberg models, you'll see that the volume knob placement is slightly different depending on which Strandberg year you buy. But I tried those other Strandbergs as well from different years with slightly different volume knob placements, and somehow in my hands when I play them, I still never bump into the volume knob. And I really have absolutely no idea how they figured this out. I don't know what they're doing with the placement. I don't know if it's the angle of the bridge. I have no idea why it works, but man, I really hope that some other companies figure out Strandberg's secret when it comes to volume knob placement and mimics it, because then we can just all enjoy a volume and tone knob without bumping into it constantly. And I know a lot of people don't even care about the type of a thing since they don't even use their tone knob, they just put their volume knob there, but we have to give Strandberg credit when credit is due. And this volume knob placement is just something special. And now we work our way down to the tremolo, and this is a mixed bag for me. For a little context, I basically only play guitars with floating bridges, and I have a ton of experience with every type of floating bridge from Floyd Roses to Fender 6 screws. I've basically tried and set them all up. The first positive is that the overall comfort of this bridge is great. It's smooth. There's no sharp edges, it doesn't stick up or stand up in an unusually uncomfortable way. The tuners are also very smooth and reliable. Also great. Setting intonation is easy, and the included Strandberg tool is one of my favorite guitar tools. although that also has some issues, but we'll get to that in a bit. Finally, if you use a tremolo like I do, which is very subtle with the occasional more aggressive type phrases, then this bridge is going to stay in tune for you just fine. And yes, it can also flutter. But even with all of those positives, I still think there's a lot that can be improved upon on this bridge. Firstly, this next thing isn't an issue, but you should know about it nonetheless. Even if this bridge can stay in tune well when you dive bomb like a Floyd Rose, it definitely is no replacement for Floyd Rose, and of course it shouldn't be. When you dive bomb and the strings slacken, they can come off of their individual posts. And then when you bring the bridge back up to pitch, sometimes the strings don't come back onto the posts, and that wouldn't be good for a live situation, for example. Now, I found that once you pull the string back up and onto the posts, it's still usually in tune, but of course you couldn't do that if you were dive bombing in a song or in a solo, for example. But I'll say it again, this is not a Floyd Rose. You shouldn't expect it to behave like that anyway. Here's the next detail, and again, this also isn't necessarily bad, but something you should know. If you imagine a standard knife edge bridge, there's one slot on each post where the knife edge rests. But in this bridge, there's actually two different heights you can choose from. When you adjust your bridge, you can select which height you want, and it gives the setup a slightly different feel. Now, Ola has a full video describing the bridge, but I found it pretty tedious. I set up the bridge a few different times on each setting, on each height, and it took me a lot of guess and check work to figure out which post I was actually on. Moreover, once I finished the rest of the setup by adjusting the bridge height via the screws and the posts, I couldn't really tell the difference between the different height options. Keep in mind, if you change strings normally, you wouldn't even encounter the different posts. And even if I was changing strings normally, I wouldn't interact with that feature. I only tried to use it for the purposes of this test. So it's not something that's going to mess with my playing or mess with my setting up of the instrument in any normal situation. I just don't really understand the utility of having those two options. Like most other modern bridges, this whammy bar can be tightened or loosened to taste with a set screw on the bridge. But the Strandberg operates a little bit differently because you have to screw it in a little bit before you adjust the set screw. But that's not an issue. It's just something that you should know about when you're using the whammy bar. I did find that the whammy bar does not stay in the correct tightness for very long. When I use the Vegatrem on my D'Angelico guitar or the stock bridge on my Parker guitars, once I adjust the arm to my preferred tightness, it pretty much just stays there forever. In fact, in the years that I've had my Parker guitars, I don't think I've ever readjusted the set screw once. And I definitely haven't readjusted the tightness setting on my Vega Trem since I got it many, many months ago. With the Strandberg guitar, I notice I have to retighten the set screw at least once every 3 days. And if I'm playing guitar for, say, 4 or 5 hours on one particular day, I usually have to retighten the arm at the end of the day, or for sure the next playing session the next day. I've taken to having my adjustment key on my desk at all times for that reason. It only takes a couple of seconds, but again, we're talking about a very high-end guitar with a high-end bridge, so these small details do matter. There's also a bit of play in the whammy arm when it's not adjusted to its most firm position. Another small detail, but I did notice it. And I don't know if these issues have been fixed behind the scenes, but from what I can tell, the 2019 Tremolo is the same one that's used in the modern guitars. If someone finds a correction to this, please mention it in the comments and I will put it in the first pinned comment below. And yes, I did look at all of Olaf's tutorials. None of the solutions solved that issues and I didn't really see it mentioned there, but maybe it is there. Maybe I didn't dig deep enough to find anyone else mentioning it. This next point about the bridge isn't an issue, but I do find it interesting, so let's talk about it. I usually set up my tremolos to be very light. I play 8 to 38 or 8 to around 45 strings, and I usually use 2 springs for a very light whammy bar feel. This bridge did not flow properly with 2 strings until I moved to my lightest gauge setup, which is 8 to 38, and even then I had to screw the springs really far and really tight in to get it to float. Then I noticed that no matter how many springs I used, or what type of springs I use, or what type of strings I use, I couldn't adjust this bridge in any way to be as light as my Parker guitar or my Vega Trem. Again, this isn't a big deal, it isn't even a bad thing, but I was still curious to figure out why this was the case, and around hour 85 of testing, I think I figured it out. Well, I definitely figured out part of the reason, but there still may be some other things that I didn't figure out, but let's just talk about it. So if you really look carefully at a tremolo bridge, it works with some of the same physics that govern a car jack. The whammy bar is a lever, and the object at the end of a lever, be it a car or a bridge, can be moved by the lever itself. Now, a lever is a force multiplier, so the longer the lever is, the less force it takes to move the object on the end. And we all know this intuitively. If we ever have a bolt that's on really tight, we grab our big long wrench because it multiplies the force we apply to it, making it easier to turn the tight bolt. Okay, so if you look at the length of the Strandberg whammy bar, and you compare it to the length of a standard whammy bar, this one is from my Parker Knifefly, you'll notice that Strandberg arm is a lot shorter, and it's probably shorter because it has to be on this shorter body and all of that stuff. But a shorter whammy arm is a shorter lever, and it's going to make the object at the end of the lever, the guitar bridge, feel heavier. And you can replicate this idea to some degree at home. If you grab your whammy bar closer at the tip, you'll notice that the bridge moves a lot easier with a lot less effort. If you grab the whammy bar closer to this end, you'll notice that it takes more effort to move the bridge. When I put the whammy bar arm from my Parker guitar in my Strandberg, and I try to move the bridge at the tip of this whammy bar arm, I noticed the bridge moves a lot easier. Not as easy as the Parker or the Vega Trem, but this does contribute to a lighter feel. Of course, this setup doesn't work because it's too long and it puts your right hand in an awkward position, but it's interesting nonetheless. So in summary, the Strandberg Tremolo is slightly stiffer than a standard tremolo, at least in my experience. That's partly due to the shorter whammy bar arm found on Strandbergs. Whether or not you like, dislike, or honestly even notice is going to be personal preference. And the final thing I'll say about the bridge is that although tuning isn't an issue, you do have to remember to screw the tuners in before you change strings so that you don't running out of tuning space moving backwards. This isn't a big deal, but there are several companies that make bridges that have infinitely turnable tuners, which is objectively speaking an improvement, so I would like to see Strandberg offer that on their guitars eventually. So let's talk about some of the Strandberg accessories. Now, my favorite Strandberg accessory is the multi-tool that comes on all of their newer guitars. And although I like the fact that you can magnetize it and put it anywhere on your instrument and it has every Allen wrench you need for adjusting the Strandberg, Just about every Strandberg player who I've talked to who uses that tool has mentioned that it breaks fairly quickly. All of them have said it broke within the first year of actually using it. And they also told me that when they contacted Strandberg quickly sent them a new one, no charge, no questions asked. And to me, that's amazing that Strandberg does that. That being said, let's just make a better, reliable tool. You can make it something like this tool, have it be all metal without any plastic parts, and yes, it will cost a little bit more to engineer, but again, we're talking about high-end guitars, so make the customer a high-end tool to use with it. You can even sell it aftermarket if you don't want to include it. The point being is, I don't like the idea that they are giving you tools that are going to break within the first year of use. To me, that's just not cool. I did also purchase the Strandberg Strap, and the strap is certainly comfortable. There are many straps that are not short enough for the nerdy guitar position that I play in, and this strap was definitely designed for nerd posture in mind. If you use a different strap that has a plastic end, you probably will notice that that plastic end will dig into your chest when you're playing. And as a result, I do recommend that you buy a strap with a fabric end like the Strandberg strap has. Of course, when you buy one of those straps, you do also have to buy a way to lock the guitar into place. And as a result, I think that it makes sense to just buy the Strandberg strap, even though it is a bit more expensive. It has the locking mechanism in place, it's comfortable, and if you can afford a Strandberg, you can afford a slightly more expensive guitar strap anyway. So if you want my opinion on should you buy a Strandberg strap, I will say the answer is, in my opinion, yes. Especially if you play in a nerdy guitar posture. Now, when I first started dating, when I first got this guitar, I actually liked the quirk of not having a guitar stand that this guitar could easily be sat on. Instead, I would leave it on my office chair and keep it on my lap at all times when I was sitting in the chair, which definitely led to a bit more practice hours. But as the relationship continued, I did start to find that this is kind of annoying. The guitar doesn't fit in my normal stands or on my rack without me being extra careful with how I place it on the rack. It's also fallen out of the rack on several occasions, and each time it does, it falls on the tuners, and that throws the tuning completely out of whack. So now I just don't put it in the rack at all because I'm afraid it's going to fall. And when this relationship became polygamous, when I got my second Strandberg guitar, things got even more annoying because I obviously can't leave both of them in my chair. I have to leave one in the case, one on the chair. When I'm switching, it becomes a whole thing, and as a result, what often happens is that I lean the guitar in a dangerous way somewhere in the room, and I don't like to have that instinct when I have a high-end guitar. Of course, I'm sure that there is some company that makes a floor stand that can accommodate the Strandberg, but as a customer, I don't want to have to look around and test stands to find which is going to work with the guitar. Just like Strandberg makes a fairly expensive but very good strap for their instrument, just make a portable floor stand and brand it as a Strandberg stand. Even make it more expensive than a normal stand. I don't really care. I'll impulse buy it anyway. It should be an option for us Strandberg users because not all of us can buy a wall mount to mount our guitars on the wall. And honestly, I don't like mounting my guitars on the wall to begin with. Tori Slusher came up with a very clever solution, but I don't like that solution for me personally. So Strandberg, please make a portable floor stand that we can fold up, put in our Strandberg cases, and all of that stuff. So I need my guitar. I, of course, need the Perform X so I can sit and practice properly. Then I need this little Fender Mustang Micro amp plug. So I packed it all up, and this weighs 12.6 pounds. The Strandberg is, of course, much smaller. The case is much smaller, and I only need to bring my little Fender Micro amp. This all only weighs 8.5 pounds versus the 12.6 pounds of my other thing. So this is, 4.1 pounds less. All right, so I have a 14-inch MacBook Pro right here. And as you can see, it totally fits fine in that case. That being said, this compartment has no padding. So I wouldn't want to leave my laptop in there without padding. I have a laptop sleeve. This one is oversized because it was for an old 16-inch MacBook or whatever back in the day. Oversized 16-inch laptop sleeve actually fits fine. And I have the Fender Micro in there as well. And I should be able to zip that up And so there it is. The best way I can think to conclude this review is to tell you how I currently view the Strandberg in relation to my own music journey and other guitar companies. Right now, my biggest goal is to log as many practice hours as possible as I refine my own unique guitar style that I'm trying to develop. Yes, I have some musical knowledge and some ideas, but nothing replaces putting a lot of hours into the guitar itself. I personally found that using just one high quality guitar for most of my practice is helpful because I spend less time adjusting to a new instrument and less time wondering if it's the guitar that's the issue or if it's me that's the issue. When I play a high quality guitar that I've been playing regularly, I know that the issue is definitely me. For a long time, my Parker Nightfly was my primary guitar, and this is still one of my favorite guitars. And for the last 6 months or so before I got the Strandberg, the Angelical guitar was my primary guitar. And despite some of the flaws of this Strandberg, it's going to be my main guitar for now, moving forward, and this is why. First and foremost, this is the most comfortable guitar I currently own. I can play it in my office, I can play it on the couch, I can play it in bed. It doesn't really matter how I sit, where I'm sitting, where I'm playing, this guitar is always comfortable. And that comfort increases the amount of time I can spend playing the guitar. Mystery Girl and I like to go on inexpensive 2 to 4 day Amtrak trips to surrounding Northeast US cities. Bringing the Strandberg significantly reduces my travel weight, which makes everything more pleasant. And yes, I could just have bought a travel guitar specifically for this purpose, but that violates my first premise of primarily using one instrument. I can go on one of those mini vacations, wake up a couple of hours before Mystery Girl, practice for those hours, and then continue on our fun day. It's one of my simple joys in life. There are other companies that make headless guitars, and I discussed that in the Q&A, but in short, in 2023, there's no other company that you can find in a Guitar Center that makes this body shape. Now, I'll probably ultimately decide to invest in a custom-made for Shaggy or maybe a B3 guitar, but making that type of investment without the potential of returning an instrument is really scary, especially since these custom-made guitars are also harder to resell usually. So no, I don't think Strandberg makes the most high-quality ergonomic guitar on the planet, but their combination of quality and accessibility is far greater than any other brand in 2023. I also give them a lot of credit for making this design more common among the guitar community. On to the Q&A. So I get a lot of questions asking me about the Aristides headless guitar, and as I've mentioned before, I have tried it and I did own it, but I didn't keep it. I will say that the Aristides guitar is far superior quality. I like the bridge more, but some of the same issues with the Strandberg are also found with Aristides. You can't decide your neck profile, you can't decide the frets you want, you can only decide your pickups for the most part, and you can't get it in a non-fan fret model for the headless, at least at the time of making this video. So I do think the Aristides headless is higher quality, but I wouldn't choose it over the Strandberg because I can't get the neck exactly how I want it. I also get a lot of questions about Kiesel guitars. For those of you who don't know, I am a huge fan of Kiesel guitars, and I've owned, 3, 4, 5 different Kiesel guitars over the years. In the past, I owned several Kiesel Vader guitars, and I liked them at the time because I was commuting a lot. The compact body was great when I was getting on the train, going to New York City, coming back, going to guitar lessons, doing guest lectures, all of that stuff. If Kiesel were to come out with an ergonomic body design, something with the same lower bezel here, or some type of other ergonomic design, I would probably for sure switch to playing Kiesel guitars again. But until they offer an ergonomic design, I don't really see a point in me getting one of their headless guitars. But I really hope they come up with an ergonomic design, because if you can have the ergonomic design, plus the option for your neck profile, plus the option for your fret type, be it fanned or straight, that would make them really the top dog of headless guitars, in my humble opinion. I've learned a lot of things throughout the experiment, and I think I've talked about most of them in the review. In terms of how I would like to design a guitar in the future for my own personal preferences, I don't want a fanned fret, personally speaking. I do want a very flat fretboard radius, and I do want a special bridge that I can still get a very light touch with. I haven't used the Sophia bridge yet, but I think that might be one that would solve this issue for me personally. I was also reassured of the fact that a guitar's comfort is the most important thing even before tone, because if you can play a guitar for a long time, it doesn't even matter how it sounds, you will develop your technique, you will develop your musicality, and then one day when you're rich and you build your own custom guitar, you'll have all the playing, and you can use that playing to match the tone that you're trying to desire. So for me, comfort is number one, and I'll never sacrifice comfort again moving forward. I honestly don't care where a guitar is made, be it Korea, China, Indonesia, America. It does not matter to me whatsoever where a guitar is made, as long as the guitar is high quality. I do think that the fret ends on this guitar may be a manufacturing issue that you probably wouldn't experience on an American-made or a Japanese-made guitar, but that is purely speculation. I think all Strandberg guitars that are in the $1,500 price range are a good deal, considering the features and the quality. For the guitars above $2,500 or so, like this one, I really can't consider it worth the price. And again, it's really the fret ends that are an issue. The fact that this locking mechanism is a little bit sharp, that should be fixed for a guitar at this price. The fact that this whammy bar arm will not stay in the position I want it in forever, that should be fixed at this price point. I feel like that Strandberg should have a separate quality that is $2,500 and above, and that should be custom shop quality, made in Japan, made in Sweden, made in the US, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, my point is that $1,500, this is acceptable. $2,500 and above, quality should be better. I'll say it again, when I compared this Strandberg to the cheapest Kiesel that I've ever owned, the Kiesel is by far, not even close, a much higher quality. So you have to keep that in mind as well. As you may know, I'm not gigging right now, but I would feel fine taking this on a gig. I do feel fine using it in other non-Strandberg related videos, and you'll see that moving forward. And would I pick it over my number one Parker Nightfly? I like the comfort of this guitar better, but I like the quality and the sentimentalness of my Parker Nightfly more. I don't think that Strandbergs have a special distinct sound, but I'm kind of biased in the sense that I believe that most of the sound comes from the scale length, the strings, the pickups, the height adjustments, the pickup height, all of that stuff. So to my ears, this just sounds like any other guitar with really good Shure pickups and a really good setup and all of that stuff. I will say, however, that the notes feel a bit more immediate on this guitar. I'm not sure if it's because the guitar is shorter overall or because the body is so light and close to my body, but the responsiveness in my hands and against my body definitely does feel different, but I don't believe that translates to the listener. This guitar is certainly not a one-trick pony. It does stand up to all of my clean playing demands and my distorted playing demands. I talk about that and show it in the video link right up here. This is not a one-trick pony. It's definitely a versatile guitar, and I definitely like all of the tones that I found on it. If Strandberg offered me a signature guitar in my name, at this point in my life, I would probably say don't put my name on it, because I personally don't feel like I've done enough for the music world to justify my own personal signature model. I would instead tribute it to somebody. I don't know, maybe I would name it after my father or name it after New Jersey, since I live in New Jersey. But I will say that that Strandberg guitar would have different specs. We would definitely change the locking mechanism. Maybe we would just round it over. It would be straight frets with rounded off edges. It would be neck through, and the pickups might even be the same, although I probably would change the neck pickup. And I would have to have a slightly redesigned bridge. And again, I don't honestly believe that I should have a signature guitar yet, maybe in the future, but I do like the idea of helping to design guitars or helping to refine guitars. Honestly, if you pick up a Strandberg guitar and you like the EndurNeck, I do believe that the EndurNeck alone can be worth the price of admission, because again, it is a very unique feel. For me personally, I don't need it, but I can totally understand why someone else would say that this is a must-have feature. So I think that the EndurNeck is worth it if you like the way it feels. Now, when it comes to the other ergonomic designs, Honestly, the only thing that I don't think is necessary is the fan fret. Again, this may or may not be considered specifically ergonomic, but I don't think you need a fan fret on a guitar for it to be ergonomic. To me, the most important feature of this guitar is honestly the body design. The body shape, having a way to keep this guitar at a 90-degree angle, that is the most important ergonomic feature for any guitar, period, in my humble opinion. And again, I talked about improvements in the main video. I mean, there might be a way we can make this a little bit better, maybe a little bit bigger, so that people with slightly larger thighs like myself can have this resting on them without any of the things poking you. But again, this is such a small thing. Making this a little bit better would improve it maybe 2-3%. So I honestly feel like they knocked it out of the park with the body design. By the way, I'm Andre Flood, and I'll talk to you soon.